Alrighty, let's take a look at nesting some code. So we've actually already been nesting our HTML. And what that means is we have an HTML element, and then inside of that, instead of just regular text like we see with a paragraph or heading 1, heading 2, we have another element. And then we can have another element. And this can go on essentially forever. Now, what I'm going to do is scroll down my page just below my 2 paragraphs that I have. And I'm going to create a new element called a div. Or if you want to use the Emmet abbreviation, div, and then as soon as you see Emmet abbreviation over here, go ahead, hit the tab letter on your keyboard, and it fills it for you. Now a div honestly doesn't mean anything. We'll talk more about divs down the road, but it doesn't do anything. Like a paragraph is going to separate your text with, for instance, a paragraph is going to separate your text. Here, it's got like a nice little spacing in there, and then it creates another one for you. A div does not really do that. So let's go ahead and say this is a div element. Go ahead, save that, refresh our page, and it's going to say this is a div element. And now inside of this element, and this is going to look a little bit weird at first, but we have a div element, and then we can have some text in there. We can have another div in here as well. We can say div, this is a nested element. And we'll close that one off as well. Let's go ahead and refresh this page, and we're going to see it shows up on the line right after it, but this whole thing is wrapped in one div. Now, a good way to look at this is right-click on your page, go to Inspect, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger here. Whoops, that was too big. And let's scroll back down. And we can hover over the elements in here. And so this is our Inspect tool. It is incredibly helpful. You're going to want to use this for pretty much everything front-end related, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript down the road. But for now, let's just stick with HTML. And what we have here is a div. And we can open up this div, and we can see that there's some text. And you can see that as I hover over it, it's actually changing what is selected on my page. And then we've got a child element, and that's what it's called. When it's nested, it's a child element. And that's on its second line. Now we can actually go one layer deeper as well. So I'm just gonna put this on a new line just to keep code nice and tidy. And I could do one more div, or let's experiment and let's do a paragraph inside of a div. This is a paragraph. Go ahead, save that, flip on over to my browser, and I'm just gonna hit refresh here. And you can see as I hover over things, it's going to show me what exactly is selected. So I have a div element here, and it's selecting both the nested div and the paragraph. Whereas up here, it's just selecting the one paragraph at a time. You can see that as I flip between them. So here I've got the overarching, the container element called div, and then I've got some text, and then I've got another div, and then I've got inside of that div, a paragraph. Or I've got text here, and then I've got a paragraph here. And you can actually see that that paragraph has a bunch of spacing around it, so it sort of bumps your text down a little bit. Now let's take a look at some terminology here. This one here, this is going to be your parent element, and this is going to be a child element. So what this typically looks like is you've got some sort of parent element, /parent, and then a closing tag like that. And then you've got some sort of child element, and then you close that tag there. Again, it doesn't matter if you have extra white space. You could put that on multiple lines if you wanted to, which I'm actually going to do. And then we could go one layer deeper, and we could call this a grandchild element /grandchild. And this can go on and on and on forever. So we can say great grandchild. And it goes on and on and on. Now the terminology is going to change based on what you're talking about. So if I get rid of grandchild and great grandchild, when we're working in here, this is our main element. Let's just call it child. And if we're talking about the element around it, the one that wraps around it like this, that's called a parent element. Now, if we're working on the parent element and we want to talk about an element inside of it, we would call it a child. Now, where the terminology changes is if we have grandchild element, and this is the one we're working on, this is our main element. Let's say we're talking with a coworker about this particular element. We would just call this the element, whichever one it is. Maybe it's a div. Child would then become the parent. Parent would then become the grandparent. And so it's relative, just like in a family hierarchy. Now, none of these are actually real elements, so let's go ahead and delete those. And just for funsies, let's go ahead and let's add an H3 element in here, just a little title that says this is an example of element nesting. So I saved that file, and I'm going to refresh this. And let's close our inspect tool with this X over here. This is an example of element nesting, and this is all in one element. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to see why nesting is actually very, very important, because right now, this was not very important. We didn't have to nest this at all, but we needed to know how this works in order to get to that next lesson. So in the next lesson, let's take a look at bolding, italicizing, and underlining your text, and then we're going to mix and match all three of them.